The candles at Stellato flickered like nervous witnesses across the starched white tablecloth, throwing long, wavering shadows that matched the tremor in my chest. This was the kind of restaurant where the menu had no prices, where the waitstaff glided like silent wraiths, and where I, Olivia Reed, 27 today, single mother, 2 dead-end jobs, rent 3 months overdue, had no business being. My only decent black dress clinging to me like borrowed skin while the single glass of Barolo in front of me cost more than I made in an hour. Table for one. 3 words I had actually said aloud to the hostess, and the pity in her eyes had been worse than any insult. Emma was with Mrs. Patel in 3C, eating pepperoni pizza, no mushrooms, probably asking for the 100th time when she could start ballet, a dream I couldn't afford because 6-year-old children of invisible mothers learn disappointment early. I had always been invisible, to foster families who collected checks, to teachers who never noticed perfect grades, to the man who vanished the moment the pregnancy test turned positive. Invisible here, too, among crystal and murmured Italian, and I was reaching for my purse. Time to pay and disappear, when the air in the room changed, a sudden collective intake of breath. Through the plate glass window, I saw 3 black SUVs nose up to the curb in perfect formation, doors opening in unison. Men in charcoal suits fanning out, hands inside jackets, eyes scanning every direction with lethal efficiency, and then the rear door of the middle vehicle opened and he stepped out. Tall, impossibly tall, shoulders that filled the doorway before he even crossed it, charcoal suit cut so sharp it could have drawn blood, hair black as midnight, styled with ruthless precision, stubble carved along a jaw forged from granite, moving like a panther who had never once needed to run because nothing had ever escaped him. The entire restaurant went still, as though someone had pressed mute on the world. The maitre d' practically sprinted, bowing so low I thought his spine might snap. "Mr. Castiano, what an honor. Your usual table is ready, of course." And the name hit me like cold water. Local news, whispers, power that didn't bother with elections or headlines, danger wrapped in bespoke wool. I dropped my gaze to my plate, suddenly desperate to become part of the furniture. Men like him existed in a different universe. One accidental glance, and I could disappear forever. Fumbling for cash, ready to bolt, when a shadow fell across my table, dark and absolute. "The lady will be joining me tonight." The voice low, Italian-tinged velvet over steel. I looked up, way up, into eyes the color of espresso, ancient and unreadable, cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, a mouth made for prayers and sins, no smile, only cool assessment and something else that made my pulse stutter. "I think there's been a mistake," I whispered, and he slid into the chair opposite me as if the words had never left my mouth. "Tonight, tesoro. Tonight you are my wife." Before I could protest, the terrified staff descended like a frightened flock, the sommelier appearing with a bottle cradled like a newborn, 1982 Brunello di Montalcino, presenting the cork with trembling reverence. Corkscrew. Taste, pour. Every eye in the room flicking toward us and away again as though looking too long might be fatal. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice pitched for my ears alone. "My name is Alessandro Vittorio Castiano. You may call me Sandro, and no, Olivia Reed, there is no mistake." My name in his mouth sounding like a secret he had always known. He recited facts the way other men recite poetry, my exact age, my jobs, my address, Emma's pizza order, my overdue rent, the dental work she needed, every private shame laid bare in that calm, lethal voice, each revelation landing like a slap. "Are you threatening me?" My voice cracked, and the corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, something far more dangerous. "If I were threatening you, tesoro, you wouldn't need to ask." He lifted his glass, crystal catching candlelight and throwing blood-red shards across the tablecloth. "To new beginnings." I didn't move, and he leaned closer. Bergamot, leather, darkness flooding my senses. "Drink, eat, pretend we are celebrating our 3rd anniversary. The man who just entered. Do not turn around. Must believe I am a happily married man, whether we leave this restaurant alive. Tonight depends on how convincing you are as my loving wife." A coarse laugh cut through the hush. A man in an expensive but flashy suit approached. slapping Sandro's shoulder with overfamiliar ease. Franco Rossi, name like a cocked gun, gaze slithering over me, naked and invasive. Castellano, you sly bastard, never mentioned a wife. Sandro's smile could have frozen fire. Some treasures are kept private, Franco. Rossi pulled up a chair uninvited, knee brushing mine. I flinched. Aren't you going to introduce me to the lovely Signora? Sandro's hand closed over mine, warm, unbreakable, thumb tracing slow possessive circles. My wife values her privacy, as do I, Rossi leered. Can't she speak for herself? And something primal surged through me, not just fear but the need to protect this dangerous stranger who had just claimed me in front of the entire room. I leaned into Sandro's side, voice dropping to a husky murmur, Ollie Sandra, but only my husband calls me that. Something dark and triumphant flashed in his eyes, his arms sliding around my waist, pulling me practically into his lap. You see, Rossi, my wife is shy with strangers. Rossi opened his mouth again, and suddenly Sandro's hand was on his wrist, bending it at an impossible angle, the man's face draining of color, sweat beading. Choose your next words with exceptional care. You're speaking about my wife. Rossi choked out an apology and fled, cradling his wrist. Sandro released me slowly, but his arm stayed around my waist, heat searing through my dress. You did very well, cara mia, he murmured against my ear, breath sending shivers down my spine. But our evening has only just begun. He paid with a flash of platinum, guided me outside with a possessive hand at my back that felt like both claim and shield, the SUVs waiting like obedient beasts. Emma will be collected and brought to us if we're delayed. Mrs. Patel has been generously compensated. She believes you are surprising your husband for your anniversary. Panic clawed up my throat. No one touches my daughter. He stopped under the awning, turned me to face him fully, streetlights carving shadows across his beautiful fallen angel face. Nothing will happen to Emma. You have my word. And tonight, Olivia Reed, you are mine. He opened the door himself, handed me into the back seat as though I were spun glass, followed the door closing with the finality of a vault. As the convoy pulled away, he spoke into the silence. Franco Rossi believes he can force a partnership by exposing weaknesses in my personal life. Tonight, he expected to find me alone and vulnerable. Instead, he found a devoted husband with a beautiful wife on his arm. You, Tesoro, just saved my life. I stared at him, heart hammering. And what happens when he realizes it was all a lie? Sandro's smile slow, lethal, utterly without remorse. Then we make sure the lie becomes the truth. Outside the tinted windows, the city, lights blurred into streaks of gold and crimson. Inside, the air between us crackled with danger, promise, and the first fragile threads of something neither of us had dared name yet. Welcome home. The house rose from the lakefront like a blade of glass and stone, every line severe, every window black mirrored against the night. A fortress wearing the mask of minimalist luxury, and the moment the heavy front door closed behind us, the city noise died completely, replaced by the hushed reverence of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. A stunning woman appeared beneath the soaring double-height foyer, sleek black hair, cheekbones sharp enough to slice paper, eyes the exact cold espresso shade of her brother's, Valentina, Sandro's sister. And she looked me over the way a jeweler studies a questionable diamond, lips curving in a smile that never reached those eyes. So you're the wife, she said, voice velvet over broken glass, circling me slowly, heels silent on the marble. Interesting, Sandro never brings women here, ever. And with one glacial look from him, she was gone, vanishing into the shadows of a corridor as if she had never existed. He led me deeper, past art. That probably cost more than my entire life, past silent staff who appeared and disappeared like well-trained ghosts, until we reached a sitting room of leather and steel and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the black water. And there, voice low, he told me the truth. 6 years ago, his wife Sophia had died in a senseless car crash, 7 months pregnant with their daughter, a grief he had buried under ice and empire building. But Franco Rossi had dug it up like a carrion crow, planning to use the anniversary and Sandro's supposed loneliness as leverage, and so tonight's performance, me on his arm, My face so eerily like Sophia's that even Rossi's men had done double takes, had been designed to prove Sandro had moved on, that the wound was closed, that there was no weakness left to exploit. But Rossi had already been inside my life. Listening devices planted in my crumbling apartment, cameras perhaps, and worse, far worse, he had uncovered Emma's biological father, Jason Miller, the boy I'd once stupidly loved who had turned violent the night I showed him the pregnancy test, who had vanished only to resurface years later as one of Rossi's most brutal lieutenants. Sandro admitted, calm and terrifying, that my photograph had crossed his desk weeks earlier, when I applied for emergency dental assistance for Emma through a clinic his family foundation funded. And the resemblance to Sophia had stopped his heart for a beat. But it was something else in my eyes: fire, exhaustion, unbreakable love for my child, that had made him decide to approach me long before Rossi ever appeared at Stellato. That very night, while I was still reeling, his men arrived with a sleeping Emma wrapped in her unicorn blanket and a bewildered Mrs. Patel clutching an envelope thick with cash and murmuring over and over, "Your husband is so thoughtful. He even sent someone with Emma's missing teddy bear." And I watched, stunned, as Sandro, the man who had just twisted a rival's wrist to the edge of breaking, knelt on the marble to greet my 6-year-old with the gentlest voice I'd ever heard, promising pools and secret garden mazes and chocolate chip pancakes whenever she wanted. And Emma, my wary, too-wise child, melted instantly, climbing into his arms as if she had known him forever. The days that followed were a fever dream, Emma learning to swim with a soft-spoken ex-Olympian who was apparently just a friend, exploring a real hedge maze, feeding koi in a hidden fountain, and on the fourth morning a tiny white Maltese puppy named Cosimo tumbled into her life with a red bow around his neck, while I drifted through corridors of impossible luxury, wearing clothes that had appeared overnight in my size, fighting terror and fury, and an attraction that grew sharper every time Sandro's dark gaze found mine across a room. For nights later, after tucking Emma in, I collided with him in the hallway outside her door, his hands steadying my shoulders, heat flaring instantly, and before I could step back his mouth was on mine. Not conquest but restrained hunger, devastating tenderness, a kiss that tasted like danger and salvation at once, and I kissed him back with years of loneliness pouring out, until we broke apart gasping, my fingers tangled in his shirt, and I whispered, "This is a mistake," and he answered against my lips, voice rough, "Some mistakes are worth making." The next day, Rossi lured him into a trap with promises of information about my past, and Sandro walked in alone because he refused to risk anyone else, only to be found hours later beaten nearly to death, broken ribs, punctured lung, concussion, blood on his perfect suit, and at the hospital I cried tears of pure rage while he, barely conscious, squeezed my hand and rasped, "Go to our daughter, I'll be home tomorrow." And the next morning, impossible, infuriating man that he was, he walked through the front door at sunrise carrying yet another gift, a second tiny puppy, because Emma mentioned she wanted Cosimo to have a friend, acting as if a punctured lung were a minor inconvenience, shrugging off my furious worry with, "I have the best doctors, Kara, stop fussing." And then, while Emma squealed over the new puppy in the garden, he turned to me, expression suddenly grave, took both my hands and said the words that tilted my entire world, "Marry me for real. You and Emma under full Castellano protection forever. No more fear, no more scraping by, no more invisible." And I refused, voice shaking. Too fast, insane, impossible, and he only nodded once, calm as ever, dark eyes never leaving mine. "I understand. But Rossi now knows about Jason Miller and Emma. You will never be truly safe without me." And the quiet certainty in his voice, the way he said our daughter as if it were already fact, lodged somewhere deep in my chest and refused to leave. Because for the first time in my life someone was offering not just survival but a future, and the scariest part was how desperately I was starting to want it. Valentina's heels struck the marble like gunshots as she strode into the breakfast room, phone still in hand, eyes glittering with a kind of cold triumph I was starting to recognize as pure Castellano. "They have Jason Miller," she announced, voice flat, lethal. "Downtown warehouse. trying to board a fishing charter to Canada like the rat he is, and Sandro was already moving, shrugging into a black coat despite the bandages still wrapped beneath his shirt, ribs cracked, lung barely healed. But the look on his face was centuries old, the look of a man who had decided someone no longer deserved to breathe the same air as his family. He kissed Emma's forehead, told her in the gentlest tone imaginable that he had to go close a business deal and would be back for dinner, then turned to leave, alone, because that was how he handled the ugly parts, always shielding us from the blood, and I don't know what snapped inside me. Maybe the memory of Jason's fist the night I told him I was pregnant. Maybe the way Sandro had called Emma our daughter in the hospital. Maybe the simple terror that this man who had become essential to us in less than a week might walk out that door and never walk back in. But I stepped in front of him, palms flat against his chest, heart hammering so hard I felt it in my throat. "If you want me to even consider your proposal," I said, voice shaking but steady enough. "Show me all of you, not just the parts you think I can handle." And for a moment, the entire house seemed to hold its breath, Valentina's eyebrow arching in disbelief, the bodyguards freezing mid-step, Sandro's dark eyes searching mine like he was seeing straight into my soul, and then, against every instinct, every rule he had ever lived by, he nodded once, sharp, "Get in the car." 30 minutes later we were rolling through the industrial district, like wind whipping off the water. Valentina in the front passenger seat reloading a pistol with casual grace, while Sandro sat beside me, hand resting on my knee like it belonged there, and when the warehouse doors rolled up the scene inside was surreal. Polished concrete, leather chairs, a mahogany table that didn't belong in a storage facility, crystal decanters catching the overhead lights, and in the center sat Jason Miller, older, harder, expensive watch, designer stubble. Same dead eyes I remembered from 6 years ago when he told me a baby would ruin his life. Wrists zip-tied to a chair, blood already drying at the corner of his mouth. The second he saw me, his face twisted into something ugly. So Castellanos screwing my baby mama, small world, and Sandro moved so fast the air cracked, one hand already around Jason's throat, thumb pressing the carotid, murder written in every line of his body, and I don't know how I got between them, maybe instinct, maybe love I wasn't ready to name. But I laid my hand on Sandro's arm and felt the tremor of rage running through him. "Let me," I said quietly, and he stepped back, barely, eyes never leaving Jason's face. I walked forward until we were inches apart and looked the man who had once broken my ribs straight in the eye. "You never wanted her," I said, voice calm, ice cold. "You called my daughter a liability the night you put me in the emergency room. So here's your chance to make it official." And Valentina slid the papers across the table like she had been carrying them for years. Full termination of parental rights. Witnessed, notarized, iron clad. Jason tried to bargain, tried to threaten, tried to use Emma as leverage one last time. But Sandro's people were already dismantling Rossi's empire in real time. Text messages pinging on silent phones, warehouses raided, offshore accounts frozen, containers of trafficked girls being liberated as we spoke, evidence of Rossi's worst crimes gift-wrapped and delivered to the FBI with an anonymous bow. And Jason saw the walls closing in, saw the future shrinking to a single choice, sign or disappear forever. And he signed, scrawling his name like it meant nothing, because to him it never had. Within minutes he was escorted out, hooded, to a waiting jet that would land somewhere in Eastern Europe under a name that wasn't his, and he would never resurface, never breathe the same continent as my daughter again. The ride home was quiet, city lights streaking across the tinted windows, until Sandro reached over and took my hand, lacing our fingers like it was the most natural thing in the world. "It's no longer about protection, Olivia," he said, voice low, raw. "It's about choice. Do you want to go back to the life where you and Emma scrape by, always one emergency away from disaster, or do you want to build something new with me, with us?" And I looked out at the lake glittering under the moon, thought of Emma asleep in a bedroom bigger than our old apartment, thought of the way she laughed now, thought of the way Sandro looked at her like she had hung the stars, thought of the way his kiss had tasted like the first day of the rest of my life, and when the gates opened and the mansion appeared, all glass and light and impossible safety, Emma came running barefoot across the dew-wet grass, Cosimo tumbling after her, hair wild from sleep, arms outstretched. "Mommy."
Sandro.
"Can we eat in the garden by the fish fountain? Please, please, please." And Sandro knelt, wincing only slightly from the healing ribs, and gave her the real smile, the one that transformed his severe face into something heartbreakingly beautiful. "Only if your mother agrees, Piccola." And I looked at them, my radiant daughter and this dangerous, complicated, impossible man who had risked everything for us, who had seen me when I had always been invisible, and I felt something inside me settle into place with the quiet certainty of a key turning in a lock that was always meant to open. So I smiled, truly smiled, for the first time in years. The garden sounds perfect, and his eyes blazed with understanding, with triumph, with love he hadn't yet said aloud, and he rose, brushed a kiss against my temple that felt like a vow. "Welcome home, cara mia." And for the first time in my entire life, I believed it was possible, a home, a family, a future, not perfect, not safe in the way the old world understood safety, but real, fierce, chosen ours.